This is Talk Business and Politics with Roby Brock.
Welcome to today's Talk Business and Politics. I'm joined by Jame Gates, Executive Vice President of the Conway Chamber of Commerce. Improve every time we do that. So good to see you again, my friend. You've got some great data with us today. You're going to tell us what the data is pointing to on congressional redistricting. We are still a couple of years away from this, but you got some preliminary census data. Before we dive into the numbers, tell everybody how redistricting and apportionment works.
Well, so we do this every 10 years, and so it's long enough to forget about it. And it's we're also, as political animals sometimes do, looking way down the path. But if we're looking at it now, the politicians have already been looking at it for at least 6 months or the last 20 years. Yeah. But it happens every 10 years after we count noses during the census, and we figure out where people live now. If that's changed, we have to move the lines around to make sure everyone's equally represented.
And the way the law is set right now, the Arkansas legislature votes on where the boundaries will be for congressional districts. Arkansas's 4 congressional districts. And it's based off what the population is on April 1st, 2020, correct?
That's correct.
So unless something changes, and there is a ballot issue out there that may change the way that congressional and legislative redistricting works, but we will not play in that space today. So let's talk about how big will a congressional district potentially be, and then there are some limitations too on how close they have to be in terms of population size.
Right, so each congressional district, and this is based on a census forecast, but it's not going to deviate by much, but it'll be about 760,000 residents per district. So each congressman will be responsible for those 760,000 folks. He'll be accountable to those 760,000 folks.
Yeah, and so when they redraw the lines, they have to be within about 1% or less, and there's not much deviation.
That's an honored legal standard. There's some case law there that if you get beyond 1% deviation between all 4 seats, which doesn't line up cleanly with the lines on a map, which we'll get into, you're likely going to be overturned with a legal challenge and be told to go back and come back with something more fair.
All right, so here's how the congressional districts have changed in terms of population. If you just look at where we kind of are now and what we're projecting here, the first congressional district's lost about 40,000 residents. The second district's gained about 16,500. The third district has gained 80,500 residents in the last decade. And the fourth district's lost about 60,000. You contend, though, it's more about cities and not about the districts in general.
Yeah, I think we open up the column, we say that Arkansas's population has been growing, but it's been becoming more suburban and shifting from southeast to northwest. And, redistricting is very complicated, so we're going to spend at least 2 columns on this. But when you get into the numbers, it's not a matter of the third district growing. It's Bentonville, Springdale, Rogers, Fayetteville are growing. In fact, 7 of the 9 counties that have some portion of their landmass in the third district are essentially flat. The second district is growing. 3 of those 7 counties are losing population, but you have some suburban and urban areas that are continuing to add. And so that's a change that will play out at the State House and State Senate level. Just because you're in quote Northwest or quote Central Arkansas, you may be losing population. It is a really small town, unincorporated area versus urban suburban.
Yeah. But still, the first and the fourth district combined 100,000 residents. That's a big shift right there. So let's talk about some scenarios that would play out. You've looked at some numbers, and obviously it's a political process, but you could make some easy kind of move this county here, move that county there, and you're pretty close to where you need to be if you just want to kind of keep it apolitical.
That's right. And so, the article is going to touch on, there are some solutions. If you really take politics out of it, which we concede isn't going to happen. But, I said that beyond the math and the things that are taking place, you have politics, but you've got a ton of case law, and that talks about things like race and, equity and demographic fairness and representation. And so you don't have just a sandbox to play in as a legislature. And then there's the constraints we talked about within 1%. I mean, it's razor sharp.
So what would you move to get to replace the 40,000 that are lost in CD1? How could you do that pretty cleanly with the counties intact?
Well, so we've already seen Congressional District 1 move over into, north central, almost northwest Arkansas. And so a quick solution is to continue the westward expansion and move Marion County, which is about 60,000 people, over to the 1st. And so that will put Lake Chico and Bull Shoals in the same congressional district, which is two very different climates, two very different lakes, one big district. And the other one is to take Pope County, historically in the 3rd district, and also move it into the 3rd.
No, down into the 4th.
I'm sorry, down into the 4th, and then taking Van Buren County up into the 1st.
And it's in the 2nd district right now. So you move
That's right.
you move Marion County, Van Buren County into the 1st, Pope County down into the 4th, and you get pretty close to that 1% threshold and making them all somewhat equal.
Yeah, I said that in the column we talk about, that does about 95% of the work. Now the last 5% is where I think a lot of politicians, a lot of constituencies will be very interested, but those are pretty straightforward. Where possible, we want to honor county lines. That's not possible everywhere. We got into that last reapportionment. And then you also want to try and keep, there needs to be some relevance. So moving Van Buren County from the 2nd into the 1st, Van Buren County and Cleburne County, both really related to Greers Ferry Lake. They both share, the benefit and economy with Highway 65. So there's some things that just kind of make sense.
But then on the political side, you're talking about taking some pretty reliably Republican votes out of the 2nd district. Congressman French Hill would arguably have a little bit of problem with that. And then Pope County is where Steve Womack, that's his home county. I mean, is he going to be willing to let that fall out of the 3rd district? These are some of the complications that get in there where, the politicians do have some say-so in this. It is a political process. Absolutely.
The 3rd is a good question. So you've got to get rid of over 80,000 people. How do you do that? I think Marion County to the 1st, it makes too much sense to be ignored, and it's not of huge consequence. But then we're choosing between the two kind of southern reaches. So do you take Pope County in its entirety, which is consistent, legal, makes sense, or do you start at the bottom of Sebastian County, chewing your way to the north? The problem with that is, to get those 60,000 plus people that you need, you'll be dividing the city of Fort Smith in half, where it's partly represented by the 4th and partly by the 3rd, which happens in much larger cities around the country. Justifying doing that be difficult in Arkansas.
So none of this will happen until 2021 in the legislative session, assuming that the process does not change. And even then, if the process changes, it's still not going to happen until 2021. And that's all we're going to get into today. But you and I are going to be at the Political Animals Club on October 16th at the Governor's Mansion in Central Arkansas for anybody that wants to attend. We're going to roll deeper into these numbers a little bit, and we're also going to talk about the state Senate districts and how they may change. You are not allowed to even tease that any further than what I've done right there, although it's fascinating how those numbers are going to shift for the state Senate districts. Yeah? Just agree with me or disagree with me?
It's fascinating, and it'll be a lot more contentious because you're dealing with 35 boundaries instead of 4.
Yeah. And that process is different too. The legislature votes on the congressional districts, but there's a 3-board of apportionment, which is the governor, the secretary of state, and the attorney general, that get to set the legislative lines. It's a whole different can of worms.
That is not an opportunity to make friends if you are on that board of apportionment.
All right. He's Jame Gates. Data Points always talks about what's going on with the data in Arkansas. This is fascinating stuff. Thank you so much.
You bet. Thank you.
All right. That's all for today's program. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Roby Brock. We'll see you next time.
Each day, the promise of our nation begins again. Arkansas and America, moving forward. I help make that promise a reality. It's not for everyone, but people everywhere depend on us.
Oh, I love you too, sweetie.
Trucking delivers, or everything stops. And that's what drives me.
I did.
You'll find us at the end of a lot of long country roads, covering over 60% of the great state of Arkansas. Our 17 electric distribution cooperatives are working day and night to provide reliable, affordable power to over 500,000 homes, farms, and businesses, just like yours. The Electric Cooperatives of Arkansas, your local energy partners.